Welcome to a bird's eye view of the pond to plate supply chain. Presented today by Dr. Simone Valle de Souza. My name is Amy Schambach and I'll be your moderator today. Today's webinar is part of Illinois-Indiana Sea Grant's Aquaculture Marketing Webinar Series that is co-sponsored by the North Central Regional Aquaculture Center, also known as NCRAC, Illinois Extension, and Purdue University's Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. So with that said, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Simone Valle de Souza. Simone is an assistant professor in the MSU Product Center in the Department of Agriculture, Food, and Resource Economics at Michigan State University. She completed a PhD in Fisheries Economics and a master's in economic studies at the University of New England in Australia, and an MBA in finance and accounting, and a bachelor in business administration at the Federal University of Paraná in Brazil. She specializes in aquaculture and fisheries management and economics, economic modeling, statistical analysis, and parameter optimization for indoor agriculture. Welcome, Simone. The screen is all yours.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for having me here today. So I will be presenting here today, like Amy alluded, bird's eye view of the pond to plate supply chain. It's part of a project that I'm working with Kwame Nakagraini, Bill Knudson, Ron Kinnanen, Paul Hitchens, and April Etnas. And it's part of a project funded by the NCRAC, North Central Regional Cultural Agriculture Center. So the idea is to present first the results from our restaurant survey, which was distributed in 2020, right after the outbreak of COVID pandemic. So I'm going to be presenting results. We've got about 550 respondents nationwide, and we ask managers and owners of restaurants to tell us the fish they serve and other details about the restaurants, which I'm going to share with you today. Just to have an idea of the distribution in terms of types of restaurants, we have a little bit of small, medium, and large size restaurants. And because we're talking about restaurants and because we're talking about a survey that was distributed during the pandemic, right after the outbreak, I also brought some numbers of the impact of COVID pandemic on these restaurants and suppliers that are between the pond and the consumer's plate. So to start, first let me introduce you to this very busy picture and tell you that one of the most important objectives of this survey was to identify the restaurant preferences for specific species of fish. Now, you've seen this research before, but our research is different in the sense that I think it was the first time that we introduced Midwest caught and farmed fish species included in the list. So it was a long list of fish species that we gave to these restaurants, and we asked them, what species did you serve last year? So that will be regarding 2019. The list you see at the bottom here is the types of restaurant that participated in this research. We asked them to identify themselves as one of these types of restaurants. Some of them selected more than one, and we left out fast food places. So when we ask them, what fish did you sell? We've got this overall picture here. For example, starting from the left, 7% of contemporary casual restaurants said that they served bass, and we include largemouth and smallmouth bass in this list. And if you see here, from all types of restaurants, the larger percentage of type of restaurant serving bass was the contemporary casual type of restaurant. And then you can see through the picture the other preferences. But we want to get into more details or narrow down or find out what is the actual species that a type of restaurant would be serving. So we did a cluster analysis, and what the cluster analysis does is to get how similar this type of restaurants were in terms of the fish they choose to serve. So the closer they are here, the more related they are. And in this cluster analysis, we had these 5 groupings that gave us the group of restaurants. I'm going to repeat again, just trying to make this clear, the group of restaurants that are likely to serve the same species of fish. And then we have one grouping with the cafe, buffet, food trucks, and ghost kitchen. Another grouping with fast casual, contemporary casual, and all restaurants that serve, that give the option of takeout or delivery. And casual dining, family style, and fine dining restaurant, they are alone, they are different enough from the others in terms of the type of fish they offer to have their own cluster. And then we look at the cluster membership and identify what is the species that they prefer most to serve. Now, I'm going to give you a very busy table, but I'm going to walk you through the table. And first, let me tell you how to read this table. So we use an average normalized values for these clusters per variable. So if the number is negative, it means that that group of restaurants serving this specific fish with a negative value serves below the average. If the value is positive, that group of restaurants are likely to serve more than average of that specific species. And the higher the number, the more likely they are to offer that particular species. Now, having said that, if we look at the negative numbers here, we can tell that the group 1, ghost kitchens, food trucks, buffets, and cafes, are less likely, or they are likely to serve below average any type of fish. In fact, fish overall, which is the first row, they would be offering less than average. And you see the same behavior in group 3 with the takeout, contemporary, casual, and fast casual, except for yellow perch and other fish, that these groups are perhaps likely to serve on average, closer to average. And just a clarification in terms of order, we gave them a little text and leave space for them to type what's the other species that they serve that was not in our list. And in that order, we've got tuna, mahi-mahi, snapper, flounder, and other different species. But yellow perch is here on the one species that is above average on itself in this type of restaurants. Now, if you look at the family style restaurant, they are likely to serve above average, at least 1.13 times the average, lake trout, the most popular species for this type of restaurant, which is in a group by itself, followed by bluegill and tilapia. And as we look at groups 5 and 2, fine dining group 5, they are serving above average species. First, the hybrid striped bass, followed by the barramundi, bluegill, the Great Lakes whitefish, walleye, rainbow trout, and all these names I'm saying. You see our Midwest species, and if you see Atlantic salmon, it's down at the bottom. a bit less popular or less likely to be offered by this type of restaurant. Now, if you look at the casual dining in group 2, we have a wider range of species likely to be served in casual dining restaurants, but it's more within the popular groups that we normally see: catfish, cod, pollock, Atlantic salmon, tilapia, Pacific salmon. But we still see rainbow trout, walleye, yellow perch, also in this group. And looking back at the first row, casual dining is the most likely to serve above average, 2.25 times above average, fish in general. That gives us an idea of what type of restaurant serves what type of fish, and points in the direction of family-style restaurant and fine dining as the place that we can offer our Midwest fish species. Then the next step of this survey, we ask about attributes. What are the attributes you look for when you choose your seafood? And this question, it's a Likert type question that asks them to rate between not important at all and very important, being the darker green, the very important. And what we see is safety is the first most important attribute that restaurants look for when they buy seafood, followed by freshness in second, and healthy. So when we talk the attribute healthy, we're saying that they are offering fish because it's a healthy food, and which would speak with their customers. And on the fourth place comes price. Now, looking at presentation, the second one, and sustainability and non-added hormones, they are also very important to a less extent than safety and freshness, but still, we have a lot of long dark green bars for those. And the least important attributes were the non-GMO, wild-caught and farm-raised. Then I did the same exercise as before, doing a clustering by the type of restaurant. Now you see some movement on the left here in terms of the clusters now, in comparing their preferences or the importance they give to specific attributes of seafood. The groupings are different. Now we have the fine dining restaurants together with cafes. And if you see on the right, the table, let me explain how to read this table now. So this is a different type of question from before. It's a Likert question. So between 1 and 5 are the answers. And I'm presenting here the average of their answers per cluster membership. So the closer to 5, the closer to very important. And if it's around 3, it implies indifference to that attribute. I highlighted in green what's between 4.5 and 5 because it's between important and very important, moving towards very important. So back to the groupings and their preferred attributes, we've got fine dining and cafes, valuing safety and freshness the most, 4.81, so very close to very important on average. And then next comes healthiness. What else? Safety and freshness, if you look across, they are actually ranking as almost very important to all types of restaurants. And on the other hand, let me just show you something here too. So looking towards the indifferent, closer to indifferent, between indifferent and important, we've got farm-raised, wild-caught, and non-GMO. Like we saw before for the overall numbers, we see it here again. Group 4 and 5, they are separated in individual groups in this cluster analysis, but they show a similar response in terms of what's important. So food truck and ghost kitchens are concerned about sustainability. Safety is actually higher ranked than the safety concerns for fine dining and cafes. They are also concerned with freshness and very concerned with price. Price is very important for them as well. Another thing I want to show you here, it's really interesting because in this project, we ran a consumer survey and we ran the restaurant survey. The results from the consumer survey show that consumers are placing sourced from the USA, caught or farmed in the USA as more important than locally sourcing. So that's consumers' view. Now, when you look at the restaurants, we see a slightly different scenario here for the fine dining and cafes. Fine dining and cafe actually value locally sourcing a little bit higher than farmed or caught in the USA. That implies that there is a connection between hypothesis they go to locally sourcing and freshness. That's what I'm getting from there, a possible connection between locally sourced and freshness. Then we ask about suppliers as well. So how important are these requirements from your seafood supplier? So now we look at the attributes of suppliers. If you're a farmer, you are a supplier, you want to know what the restaurants are looking for. If you see the cluster dendrogram, they are all over the place. So each type of restaurant would have their own perception of what to look for in a restaurant, but there is one group that is closer together, which is the fine dining, family style, fast casual, casual dining, and those who offer the option of takeout. And for that group, the most important is the product consistency and consistency of supply and delivery schedules. It makes sense if you think that a restaurant sets up a menu and the most important thing is to be able to provide consistent product and always have it available and be aware of delivery schedules. So it makes sense. But it is also between important and very important, tracking order status and efficient packaging. But closer to indifferent is shipping to multiple addresses. And then we ask, who are your suppliers? Where do you buy seafood from? And we've got another composition of clustering here. In this case, fine dining are similar to family style. And remember when I showed before that family style and fine dining are the ones that we as in Midwest species producers would be looking at. So they are grouped together with the same characteristics in terms of suppliers. And the other group would be cafes, takeout, casual dining, fast casual. Now, this is a different question again. So it was a yes and no question. So do you buy from commercial or state tribe or from cooperatives, farms, etc.? Yes or no. So that gives us answers of 1 and 0. So the results you look at in this table are the percentage of those who chose that specific supplier. So we can say that a third of fine dining and family style restaurants, 35%, say they buy their seafood from farmers and aquaculturists. And about 46% of the fine dining would be buying from live markets. And the large proportion, 65%, would be buying from wholesalers, retailers, and distributors. So they're more likely to buy from wholesalers. The same applies for casual dining, fast casual, cafe, and takeouts. 71% of them are buying from wholesalers. But again, a third from live markets and farmers and aquaculturists. And we ask about the frequency, how often do they buy? And here we have an option from seasonally, monthly, weekly, 2 to 3 days a week, or daily. And that light blue bar that stands further for almost all of types of suppliers is the weekly purchase. So restaurants buying from these types, these suppliers, cooperatives, wholesalers, grocery stores, commercial, state, or tribal fishermen or processors are buying weekly. Now, in terms of those who buy from live markets and farmers, they are more likely to buy 2 to 3 days a week and weekly as well. So if we're talking about consistency in supply, as a farmer, we will be looking at 2 to 3 days a week supply to restaurants. Then we also ask about their strategies to cope with supply problems. And the first reaction is to switch suppliers temporarily, and also switch from fresh to frozen. I suppose that would be a consequence when you switch suppliers. But switch from fresh to frozen is the next option. And then after that, switch to a different size or portion of that same product form. Or drop the fish from the menu temporarily. And they actually rather be dropping the fish from the menu temporarily. I mean, a larger proportion would be dropping fish from the menu than those who would be switching to a different species. Probably implies that switching to a different species would require knowledge on how to prepare that different species as well. Then we ask, where do you look for a new seafood supplier? And remember how we saw before that most of them will be buying from wholesalers, and a third from live markets and farmers. So when we look where they look for a new seafood supplier, that's what we see again. They go to wholesaler food shows, and they go to farmers markets to find a new seafood supplier. And there is also another 34% of respondents of these restaurants who are looking for new suppliers in the social network. Very popular nowadays. Okay, so now we start to enter the realm of COVID-19 pandemic. So just reminding you again that the survey was distributed right after the initial outbreak in 2020. So we asked about the effects of the pandemic and if they would be planning to change the settings after COVID. In this case, the best fitting was for 4 clusters, where ghost kitchens, food trucks, and buffets, they are individually different. So they all have their own grouping, and everybody else is in one group. So we can see that more buffet type restaurants, food trucks, and ghost kitchens were closed than other types of restaurants. Again, this is a 1 and 0 response, as a yes or no, so we can see as a proportion of the respondents here. If we look at how much less, those who said they sold less seafood than usual, we'll see that most of the takeout, fine dining, casual dining, that group sold less seafood than usual. Interestingly, ghost kitchens, I assume that was that will be the height of the pandemic, ghost kitchens sold actually more seafood than usual, at least 37% of them. And they are the ones who actually indicated that they had some issues with seafood supply on the last row, and so the buffet restaurants. But then we asked those who said they sold less seafood than usual, what percentage less seafood did you sell? And separating only those who said they sold less seafood than usual, now we have 37% sold less, 1 to 25% of what they would sell before, and almost half of them said that they sold 50% less, up to 50% less. And in this context, we also asked if they were planning to change the restaurant, the settings after COVID. And we had almost 70% saying yes. And we compare on the left the question where they selected the description of the restaurant at the time. And on the right, we have the response to what will be the description of your restaurant after COVID-19 pandemic. And you see in green the numbers that increased and red numbers that decrease. Some cases are a small different percentage, but if you look at fine dining, we had 26% fine dining, and then they indicate, then 20% only indicated that it would continue being a fine dining restaurant after COVID. So there's a reduction of 6% of respondents there. Casual dining went from 49% to 31%. Family style from 27 to 16% of respondents. So we see here a movement from family style, casual dining, and fine dining into contemporary casual, fast casual, and offering takeout. If we look at the demand for food services, we can see that, yes, the impact of lockdowns and social distancing measures during the COVID pandemic was really significant. Demand for food services dropped by 38.2% in 2020. Now, numbers for 2021, it's still an expectation because this research came out halfway through 2021. So it's considering what happened in the first semester of 2021, they were expecting that there will be an increase in 26.6% increase in demand for food services in general in 2021, and still another 18% increase in 22, and then stabilizes. So a recovery is expected. If you look from the market side, from the consumer perspective, sometimes some types of restaurants are already showing signs of recovery. So according to this market research from Mintel, that shows consumer choices to attend a type of restaurant in February 21 and April 21. We can see from the top, none of the above. So there were more consumers not choosing to attend any of the restaurants in April than February. And if you look at the last two sets of bars, you also see that there was a reduction from February to April, from blue to red, in attendance of any full service or limited service restaurants. But now if you look specifically to fine dining and family restaurants, there was actually an increase already in April in relation to February 2021. So consumers were starting to go out more to these fine dining restaurants and family style restaurants. And the same applies for coffees and tea shops. coffee and tea shops. So there's some recovery happening there. Overall, what this market report in terms of what consumers are looking for suggests is that for restaurants to recover from the pandemic and succeed in the future, they will have to be offering the alternative for consumers to order online and off-premise dining. They are also suggesting catering for flexible schedules. And there is an indication that young diners would be looking for a variety of cuisine. And also there isn't, it's not here, but youngsters are also looking for flexible schedules like happy hours, for example. And restaurants will have to ease diners' cost and safety concerns, and high quality menus and family offerings can drive visitation. I brought this here because I think that if you're supplying a restaurant, if you're planning to supply a restaurant, this is what the restaurant is going to be doing. So you will be able to, the farmer will have to be able to attend the new requirements of these restaurants. And now I start our bird's eye view of the supply chain from pond to plate before and after COVID-19 outbreak. So I'm going to start with some key factors to look at, and then we dig into revenues, industry revenues per type of food services. So let's start looking at the big picture in terms of aquaculture industry revenue and the international trade. We were all there, we saw what was happening with the pandemic, airports closed, supply chain was suffering. And yes, imports reduced. In this case, imports dropped by 10% from 2019 to 2020, but exports fell by 31%, which is $37 million. But despite the decrease in these exports, and taking advantage of the decrease in imports, revenue of the industry, fish and seafood aquaculture industry in the US actually increased by 3%. Now, there were monthly changing prices too. We can't talk about that without talking about the prices. And the import prices had a loss of 3% between 2020 May and 2020 July. We already had a drop of 3% compared to a 11% drop in export price index. So, okay, so these are our price indexes, and this is the change in these indexes. And we also have to look at the price of seafood. That's the good news. The price of seafood actually increased in 2020, and it is expected to continue show a positive annual change at least up to 2026. And then the farmer, the aquaculturist, is going to say, yeah, but we also had large expenses during the pandemic. Prices of feed increased by 2.3% from 2019 to 2020. And 2021, even more, almost 16% increase in prices of fish feed. So the prices of seafood kept increasing through the pandemic, but so did the price of feed. And at the end, we still had a 3% increase in revenue in the industry, but we now see many factors that contributed to increase revenue or decrease revenue. And yes, the price of fish feed had an impact in 2021, which is just one of the reasons why we see a reduction of 1% predicted for the revenue in the industry in 2021. Wages reduced. Expenditure in wages during the pandemic were actually 0.7% less than in 2019, and it's expected to be also even less in 2021. And we all know that the whole industry is facing difficulty to find the workforce in this time and age during the pandemic. But it's expected that this will settle down and we will, wages will start being increasing from 2022, which means there is an expectation that workforce will find a balance here. Good news from the per capita seafood consumption. There was indeed a reduction from 2019 to 2020. Seafood per capita dropped from 16.39 pounds per capita to 16.33, not much, but a small decrease. But that is expected to recover now, from now on. And we are expected to see per capita seafood consumption at levels as high as 20 years ago. So that is a positive aspect. In terms of seafood preparation, now I'm going to start looking into specific players in the supply chain. So seafood preparation industry is the industry that purchases the fish and shellfish from the industry and processes them to create a prepared seafood product for retail and wholesale and consumers. So in 2020 to 2021, saw a small growth in the numbers of establishments. So we have establishments in green and revenue in blue. And in terms of revenue, 2019 to 20 was actually a positive value there, positive change, which is expected to continue positive in 2021. Long story short, 2021 is expected to see 1.2% increase in relation to 2020 in terms of seafood preparation revenue in the US. In terms of wholesaler, we saw a drop during the pandemic, but a significant increase in 2021. So that -3 from 2020 in revenues is turned into a 20.4% increase in 2021. Fast food restaurants, we saw a drop in terms of total revenue of -13 in 2020, but well recover of 15.8% in 2021, which gives us an idea of stabilization there, because the recovery is even higher than the loss. Single location full service restaurants, again, -14% during the pandemic, but a recovery of 19% in 2021. It's expected to recover well. Chain restaurants, a bit worse, 18%, losses 18.8, almost 19, and a slow recovery, slower in terms of the losses. And the worst case scenario of them all is accommodation. Of course, hotels and accommodation and food services in general, they would be 63% of their revenue are coming from restaurants. So they were closed too. I didn't look into the accommodation services in terms of establishment closes, but overall, I mean, in separate from the food services, but overall the losses was about 37% in 2020, but still going to recover to 21, 22, a slower recovery. In terms of warehouse sales, they were happier. In fact, consumers research supports that consumers' expenditure during the pandemic were mostly on supercenters, about 55%. And they are likely to continue using in the future the market channels that they used for the first time during the pandemic. So there is an increasing adoption of what they use. That includes the supercenters, supermarkets, and also extends to take-out options and delivery options as well. And supermarkets was the most positive, the largest positive increase in revenue in 2020 to 10%. And that's going to be to stabilize through the years now. So general conclusions is that 2020 had an overall positive result in the aquaculture revenue, given give or take prices of feed or prices of seafood, imports, exports. Overall, there was a positive balance of 3% increase in revenues from 2019, although there is a 1% decrease projected for 2021. Per capita consumption dropped during the pandemic, but is expected to recover to a 20-year high level. And the price of fish and seafood was, although slightly positive, affected by the pandemic. And we can see that food services industry lost about 38% in revenues during the pandemic, but it's showing signs of recovery and is projected to recover to 19 levels. In fact, because I was playing with cluster analysis, I put all these predictions together and see what is IBIS, those reports are mostly from IBIS World, and their predictions are actually closer to what we saw in 2019 and 18. If you see the blue triangle shape there, these predictions are telling us that the years to come are likely to be similar to 2019 and 18, but not what we saw in 2020, let alone 2016 or 15, which is the subject of my next research project. Why are they so different? So I want to say thank you all for bearing with me throughout this very long presentation, and I have to say thank you to NACREC too for funding this project, and to my colleagues working with me, and I will open for questions. Back to you, Amy, if we still have time. Did I talk too much?
You did not talk too much. We still have a little over 10 minutes for questions. So far we have one. And so a question from Bob is, were any restaurants in the survey part of chains or individual owners?
We had, let me have a look. Can I just go back? We had casual, no, we didn't have chains, no, because we specifically separate fast food, and that would have included chains. But I don't know if they are individually owned. We didn't ask that. Sorry about that.
We'll give people a few minutes to type their questions in. I have a question in the meantime. Will you talk a little bit more about what a ghost kitchen is, and maybe some local examples or regional examples of ghost kitchens?
So a ghost kitchen was very popular during the pandemic because it's like a restaurant without the tables. So they have the kitchen, and they receive the orders online or by phone, and they deliver at the door, so you can pick up and take home, or a food delivery company can deliver the food, or they deliver. So it's like a restaurant, but they don't have the tables to serve, and they were quite popular during the pandemic because it was only delivery. Does that make sense?
It does. I was wondering like how ghost kitchens marketed themselves and let consumers know that they were out there, because they wouldn't have, you're saying that they don't have a physical storefront.
They don't have a physical storefront. Yeah, they would be advertising online.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's quite interesting, and it was popular during the pandemic, but it's very much advertised through social networks and heavily on social networks.
Okay. So next question, were the restaurants surveyed nationwide or only in the Great Lakes Midwest region?
Nationwide. Yeah, we had almost, in fact, we had a lot of answers coming from California, Florida, but it was distributed nationwide. Balanced between the states as most as we could.
I have a question about the attributes that you asked.
Yeah.
I think I was hoping to see a result that I didn't see. So
what were you looking for?
Deeper. I know.
And the seafood attributes?
Yeah, seafood attributes from restaurants, from the chefs.
Okay.
So I know that one thing that we've seen and heard from a lot of producers is chefs are very picky about fillet size and also, you know, taste and texture. So more of those, like the things that would fall under, you know, quality and consistency for products. Was that included as a choice in the attribute section?
No, it was not. The attributes that we were looking for were the attributes that they are presented as a market claim, as a label on your product, or a marketing claim, rather than the actual form. Now, we do have, it's a very extensive survey. This is just part of the results that we obtain. There is another part of the survey where we ask about the form of the fish. So they are not considered a quality attribute, but we do ask if they prefer frozen or fresh, in fillets, whole, if they buy it live, or if they buy fresh or frozen. So that we have those results as well, still to show. I didn't bring them today, but not as attributes. But I can tell from that part that there is a preference for, no, I'm not going to say that until I have full results.
Better safe than sorry, right?
Right.
So next question. Can you give some examples of the category other for fish species? Assumption is maybe crustacean or shellfish.
Right. So I'm going to give you promises instead of answers. This is also part of the survey, but not part of the presentation. We ask separately about fish, shellfish, and mollusks. And I didn't bring the shellfish and mollusks here, so I don't have the results here of the preference for shellfish and mollusks. But I'm sorry, can you go back to the question again?
Yeah, so when you presented the different preferences by fish,
and the other,
it had other categories. Yeah. What would be examples of those others?
Tuna was was typed in a lot of that other option. Mahi mahi, snapper. I have a list somewhere. So yeah, so basically tuna, snapper, mahi mahi, yeah, and other species. Let me have a look.
Thank
Can I
you.
just stop sharing here and have a look? Yeah, sure.
While you're looking, I'm gonna call on Sharon, who has her hand raised because she would like to ask a question.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi, thanks, Amy. Now I have two things on my screen. I don't know how to get rid of them this minute, but thanks for your presentation. That was really interesting. So my question mark is, this last summer I was working with a chef in Milwaukee, and I brought him down all this Great Lakes whitefish. And he's like, oh, this will be great for weddings and like catering purposes, but in my restaurant, I'm still going to be served, and he specializes in seafood. I'm still going to be specializing, like my tacos are going to be mahi mahi. And it kind of blows my mind because everybody was raving about these whitefish. And I was just curious about the supply chain and why you think that might be. Is it because mahi mahi is like available every day, or people or restaurants get hooked up into like a buying club? I don't know why he would have said that. Maybe I should have asked him, but I didn't.
That's very interesting. He didn't mention where he was getting the mahi mahi from.
No, he did not.
Very interesting. And I'm interested to know what's going to happen after the pandemic. I confess that I didn't get into the supply chain of mahi mahi, and it's not one of the species that we are working here. So I didn't really, I'm sorry, didn't really get into that. But it's really good information that you're giving us, Sharon, that that market is actually increasing that much and becoming popular here.
Right. And so the other thing, working with some chefs over the course of my career, is it does seem like one of the problems is that with Great Lakes fish, I'm talking about commercial fishing now, and it could be the aquaculture industry too.
Mm-hmm.
They need to know that they can keep that species on their menu for like 6 months, and maybe sometimes those fish aren't available, and maybe that's why they go to species like mahi mahi or, tilapia raised in Chile. I don't understand exactly how chefs purchase their fish. And maybe you have a better understanding of that, but I didn't kind of see that on there as like, can I get this fish all around the year, whenever I need it?
Mm-hmm. Well, they do ask for consistency in supply and delivery schedules, and they indicate they want to buy weekly at least.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because I don't know if you heard about these concepts, but we're talking about stated preferences and reviewed preferences. So when you ask them in the survey, they're going to tell you what they would be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
But if there is something, a shock happening in the market, some special offer in the market that might be attractive, they might go for it instead of following what they stated would be their priorities. So yes, they are looking for food safety, and they are looking to serve seafood because it's a healthy type of food for their customers. And they need it to be fresh because we're talking about seafood. But they are also looking at prices, and competition hits hard when we start looking at price of the import of some imported seafood, and become hard to compete here. And if you're talking about mahi mahi, I'm sure we're talking about a year-round supply, and that would make it easier for the restaurant to have consistency of supply throughout the year, if that's what they're looking for. But I would, from what I've I'm reading here, and from what we're doing research, mahi-mahi is fashionable right now, so it might be more because it's something different. Remember how I said that consumer researchers are telling that consumers are looking for something different? So mahi-mahi is one of the different fish that are showing up in restaurants and are becoming popular. And I found interesting that your contact actually compared with Great Lake whitefish, you said?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's kind of a similar type of meat, right? And flavor, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it might be related with the price that they are receiving. I mean, that they're paying for the different species.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, thanks. Thanks again for what you've presented today. It's interesting.
Thank you, Cheryl, for sharing that. That's very interesting.
Sharon, this is a little off topic, but I was just at a seafood restaurant and one of the market choices was mahi-mahi. And my question was, is that fresh frozen or fresh? They said, well, it's fresh frozen. So I said, well, what is fresh and locally caught? At that time it was tuna, so I went for the tuna. Okay, next question. If in nationwide survey, how did you prevent against regional biases?
When we distribute the survey, well, there are two types of biases there. We distribute a survey through Qualtrics, which is a professional surveying distributing company, and we ask them to balance the distribution, the demographics of the distribution. So they control by states the quantity of responses we have per state. If we have too many from one, they close distribution in a state and open in another where we don't have answer. They control in order for us to get a balanced response. And do you mean the bias in terms of local preferences as well? If you mean in terms of local preferences, we can extract from data a local preference per state. We can do that. I just thought that with about 550 respondents at the moment, we wouldn't have much certainty if we break down the data too many times. So it's better to look at the bigger picture. But I agree with you that different regions might have a tendency to like one or another. Actually, you gave me a great idea. So I'm going to separate regionally rather than state, make a Midwest only response and see what we get from there. That'll be interesting too.
Yes, Simone, this is Don Schreiner. I asked that question because I was really interested. I was really surprised to see like lake trout was actually even on your radar, because if it's a nationwide survey, you know, you've got both coasts, the Gulf of Mexico, and really lake trout's pretty regional up here anyway. At least I thought it was. So that surprised me. So that's why I asked the question, and it would be fun, you know, if it's not too much hassle, of course, to break that out.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, to break that out and see how things change from region to region. You know, I'm also surprised to see like the tuna and the mahi-mahi not even registering. It's kind of like in the other species, when you've got those big coastal areas, you know, especially the Pacific coast and the Gulf, where tuna is a big deal. So it's really interesting what you came up with there. Great job. Thank you for sharing that, and I'm looking forward to the next chapter of some of your work.
Thank you, Don. And just a comment about what you said about people outside Midwest knowing our species here. Our consumer survey was much larger in terms of number of respondents. We had more than 2,000 respondents, and we were able to obtain significant results by region. And what we saw from the consumer survey is that consumers from the South tend to really like our species from up here because, and I'm thinking now, it's probably going to that discussion about they're looking for something different to eat. They're looking for a variety, and they are actually looking to buy our fish. In fact, from the consumer survey, the preference from other states in the South was for the rainbow trout, while the Midwest preference was for the Great Lake whitefish from the consumer's perspective. But it was interesting how the southern states were actually looking for species we produce up here.
Do you think that has something to do also with so many people who live between the South and the Midwest, or have moved to the South from the Midwest?
I would go for the have moved. I just saw recent research on how much immigration happens within the United States, and there's a significant part of population in any state that is coming from other states within the country. So I would say that it's possibly people from the Midwest who moved down south that know it and introduce these species to their colleagues down there. In only a couple of years here, I've got 2 graduate students from Michigan and Wisconsin who are going to Florida and New Orleans. So there is a lot of movement happening within states.
Absolutely. Well, I hate to bring a close to a good discussion, but we are over time. I just wanted to thank Simone for the presentation today. Thank you for sharing your research, and thank everybody who participated. You will be receiving 2 follow-up emails, one with an evaluation link, and then once we have the video online, if you'd like to view it again or share it, we'll also share that. We are going to follow this webinar up with a 2-part webinar on product quality and consistency on March the 9th and April the 6th. Those will also be on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. So we hope to see you soon. The next topic we're going to really talk about is, how to produce a consistent size fish for your market. So going into how to use your bio plan, grading, and your harvest logistics to be able to meet your consumer demand. And that will be presented by Travis May. So thank you all. Thank you, Simone.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everyone.
And everybody have a great day.